Give her a little gas, open it. All right. Well, we got good crank now, that's a plus.
So I wasn't hearing the fuel pump prime at all, which led me to believe that maybe the fuel pump had seized or failed. I pulled the fuel pump out and apart. I took the fuel pump out, set it on the ground, and using just a couple of leads to an extra battery I had, I tested the fuel pump while it was out of the car, and the fuel pump ran just fine. So at that point, I reinstalled everything for the fuel pump and then started tracing the fuel pump power wires back into the ignition area, kind of testing as I go to try to find out what was wrong. One of the main things I tested was the main relay. The main relay is this kind of fuse block, relay block back here that deals with a lot of the switching between the ignition, the ECU, and the fuel system when you go to first start the car. I found a guide online about how to pull this plug and systematically test that all of the wires going into the relay and out of the relay were getting the proper power that they needed. I believe up until the very last step, I tested everything correctly, and everything, including the relay. I even swapped one in from a friend's EG just to test that wasn't the relay that failed. So everything at this point was working well as well. The next thing I started checking was the fuses themselves. I did find, as I was testing the relay systematically based on a guide that I found online, that one or two of the fuses I actually needed as part of the ignition system and the fuel system were not even there. So I added a couple of extra fuses. So I would say, if you're starting to debug anything, go through every single fuse, make sure you have a fuse in place for the car that you're trying to get running, and double check that every single fuse is in good working order before starting. So once I replaced that missing fuse under the dash, then I started testing that I was getting power to the ECU. So I pulled the ECU fuse here under the hood, and I jumped the prongs in between where the fuse slots in. And at first, I wasn't getting any power to the ECU. But after I had fixed the fuse under the dash, I forget which number it was, but then I noticed I was getting power to the ECU after that point. One of the other things I had noticed was that I was getting a check engine light. And when I came underneath the dash to jump the service port to get a reading, to get the flashing lights for reading the cell codes, when I jumped the service port, I just got a solid cell. So a solid cell with a no fuel prime condition is very symptomatic of a bad ECU. So luckily I had a backup OBD1 ECU. This was one I was going to try to convert my CRX to OBD1 when I did the B16 swap, but kind of backed out of doing that in favor of it just remaining more OEM in stock. But I do have an OBD1 ECU with Honda. So I pulled the stock ECU out. I plugged in the Honda ECU. I flashed it quickly with, I think, a USDM D15 or D16 map, some sort of D series map. And I plugged this into the car. And the second I turned the key to the number 2 position, I heard the fuel pump kick on and I got fuel prime. So once the car was running, I was able to go back and check my timing. I did find that even though I had corrected the camshaft position from being off pretty dramatically, I was still off about a tooth in terms of what I had set for the timing. So I went back and adjusted the timing belt. And then once I had the timing or the camshaft position correct for the timing, then I went and adjusted the distributor timing, and it seems pretty spot on. The stock ECU in this 92 Honda Hatchback CX is a P05. It is a manual transmission D series ECU. The problem was that the ECU was not working. It was not turning on. I opened up the lid to the ECU and I did notice that a couple of the capacitors were leaking on it. And it was confirmed that it was the ECU issue when I was able to swap in my other Honda OBD1 ECU, and the car started right up, even on the 2-year-old gas that's in the gas tank. So now I'm back to running on the stock ECU. I found an eBay seller who does capacitor repairs. I mailed it off to them, and for about $75, I was able to get them to replace all of the bad leaking capacitors with new ones. And I'm happy to report that this hatchback now runs.